you're affiliated with Dignity. Okay, well, I've got two after, so I think it's time we go ahead and start. Logan, I'm going to ask you to go ahead and start the recording if you would. Welcome to this evening's presentation of Queer Catholic Faith, Dignity USA's new video conference series, in which we invite members of the LGBTQ allied communities to share their perspectives on faith and spirituality, and we hope to dialogue about how we live Catholicism more normatively in our community. My name is Bill Baird. I'm on the National Board of Directors of Dignity USA, and it's my honor to serve as your host for this web conference. This evening, many of you were expecting to see the smiling face of Marianne Duddy Burke, the Executive Director of Dignity USA. Unfortunately, Marianne is not able to join us this evening due to the recent death of her sister, Pam. Please join the Dignity USA community as we offer support and prayers to Marianne and to her family. Our special guest this evening is Hilary Howes on the topic of being transgender in the Catholic Church today. Hilary will be interviewed by Jim Smith, the program manager for Dignity USA. But before I introduce Jim and Hilary, I want to ask Logan Bear, Dignity USA's webmaster and master of technology, to give us a brief explanation of the process that we will be using this evening. Logan?
Thanks, Bill. This is our meeting room, and here are some instructions you can do. If we're too loud or too soft, you can adjust the volume by the volume control under each picture. You may have noticed, as many have already done so, that there is a chat area below the presentation and poll. However, there's also a section called questions and answers. This is where you would actually ask questions directed to our guest Hilary and to our interviewer Jim. These will then be sent to the screen like this. If you have any technical issues, please send me a direct message. I'm known as Dignity USA on the board. And that's all I have. We're going to close this poll and start a new one. And we hope that you would all participate in that. And I'm going back to Bill. Bye.
Thank you, Logan. Now it is my honor to introduce tonight's faith-sharing conversation. This evening, Dignity USA's program manager, Jim Smith, who works with us out of Minneapolis and who coordinates the Queer Catholic Faith program, will conduct what is sure to be a fascinating and provocative interview. Jim brings over 20 years of ministry in the areas of spirituality, faith formation, and social justice. Welcome, Jim. That's not Jim.
Hey.
There's Jim. Hey.
Just a little slow tonight. Thank you, Bill.
Technology at work.
Hi, everyone. Great to be here. Thanks for joining the conversation.
Great. Thank you, Jim. Our special guest this evening is Hilary Howes. Hilary is the author of To Be or Not to Be, A Catholic Transsexual Speaks for Conscience magazine, and has a long list of activities as an activist. She has been a public information officer for Transgender San Francisco and a member lobbyist for Gender PAC, for the National Center for Transgender Equality and Equality Maryland. Hilary currently serves on the board of Gender Rights Maryland and on the Trans Roundtable of the Center for Lesbian and Gay Studies in Religion and Ministry at the Pacific School of Religion in Berkeley. Recently, Hilary participated in a symposium sponsored by New Ways Ministry with her wife, Celestine, in a discussion called Accidental Lesbians, Catholic Marriage Through a Gender Change, a most unusual topic. Professionally, Hilary designs events in Washington, D.C., and is best known as an author, speaker, and creative in the event, exhibit, and color industries. Personally, she has been married for 34 years, is the parent of an NYU graduate, and is proud to have been a son, daughter, father, mother, husband, and wife at various times in her life. It's my pleasure to introduce Hilary to all of you.
Hello, everybody.
Welcome, Hilary.
Thank you.
I've had the pleasure of meeting Hilary about a year ago, last summer in Chicago, and Hilary attended your breakout session just a month ago at the Baltimore New Way Symposium. And, you know, you deserve a whole day to kind of unpack the story of your life and your journey and your transition. It's absolutely fascinating and engaging, and we don't have the time, unfortunately, to go into a lot of detail. But I want to give you a chance to tell a little bit of your story, and I'm going to ask if you would start kind of in the middle of that story. You described to me kind of a watershed moment in the journey of your transitioning, and for those of us who've been to Disneyland or Walt Disney World, you know, it's always a memorable experience. But I'll tell you what, you had a memorable experience on that trip with your family. Could you start there? Now, folks, she didn't know I was going to ask her to start in the middle of this story, but I'm sure you'll be able to roll with it, Hilary.
Absolutely. Yes, well, I am, as you can probably see from the slides, just as old as Disneyland. And so we both celebrated 40 years of adventure together. I had been at that time exploring my more feminine side and working with Transgender San Francisco to a support group to understand better, you know, what was going on for me. And one of the things that happened was we got the opportunity to, as a family, go to Disneyland for my 40th birthday and celebrate 40 years of my own adventure. And the special thing for me on that trip was to be able to dress as a woman for the first time, sort of full time, for the whole weekend. And something very powerful and very unexpected happened when I did that along with my family. Absolutely nothing. Absolutely nothing happened. There was never any kind of notice taken. There was never any question. There was nothing but you know, happiness there at the happiest place on earth. And so it was a huge feel-good moment for me, in part because I was so validated in being the woman that I had always wanted to be. It was the ride home that was the hardest part for me. Because it was at that time that the realization came to me that I needed to live as a woman, to live authentically in this world. But I also realized how important a couple of other identities were to me. I was a husband, and I loved Celestine, my wife, very much, and that was really important to me. And I was a father, too. And that was very important to me. My daughter, Alethea, I've been very much a part of her life all the way along. And she was about 10 years old then. I'm sorry, about 12 years old then. And it was that moment in which I didn't understand how I could be all three things at the same time. And it took another year or so of working with a therapist and a couple of therapists actually, and support group, and getting some wisdom from a number of the people I'd met along the way that allowed me to kind of hold those that mystery, if you will, in my head of being three and one at the same time. Um, that before I could actually put that together and transition into an authentic life.
Yeah. You know, in looking over the photos that everybody is seeing now, and I thank you for presenting kind of this story of your life in pictures. It's got to feel a little vulnerable, I suppose, for you to do that. But when I came across the photo of you as a young scout, a boy scout, of one degree or another in terms of whatever sort of I was in the Boy Scouts, the Weeblos. I don't know how far you got, but um, I look at that picture and I go, that's not Hillary. That's not the woman I know, and I've only known you for about a year, but it feels like such a disjoint. But that is you, and so the journey to sort of integrate that kid with who you are now must have been a journey. And can you say a little bit about how that integration happens, or happened in you, and how do you see two different people when you look back at those slides and you see those photos of you as a kid? Look at
Well,
yourself now.
there is kind of the temptation to talk about myself then in the third person. Um,
Hmm.
and yet, it is all me. Those are all parts of who I am, and it does challenge other people's concepts of gender and gender roles. But thankfully, we've come to a point in our society where there's a willingness to go there and accept people outside of sort of normal gender roles. And I'm sort of proud to be part of that process. Um, for me personally, there was there was it was clearly inauthentic. I wasn't being who I was. I was
Hmm.
trying all sorts of things. The way you might try on, a new suit or a, a baseball uniform. It's just some youthful experimentation, if you will. There was a point at which, during Boy Scouts, I really thought that I could be a park ranger someday. The hat was probably a dead giveaway. But I finally realized that wasn't who I was. And I think spending a life in a creative field has given me the chance to accept so much variety and understand how it can all exist at this sort of
Hmm.
simultaneously. I do still know my knots though, and those come in very handy. So I learned great things in the Boy Scouts, and I'd certainly encourage others to give it a try now. But apparently, if you're transgendered, you're better off with the Girl Scouts.
Hmm. Hmm. You spoke to me at one point of how so that trip to Disneyland was a bit of a watershed moment, and from that point on, you began to more consistently present as a woman, not just in your family, but in your business and publicly and with friends. Can you say a little bit about how that was, not only for you, but how how you experienced, how they might have experienced your transition, what effect it might have had on them?
Sure. I transitioned in about the hardest way possible. I think
Yeah, yeah.
in that what I did is for about a year I tried to walk that gender line. I wanted to find out if I could maintain my marriage and fatherhood by simply expressing myself more femininely. Um, and so I started to let my hair grow. I started to allow myself to wear colors. I had for a number of years in order to hide the fact that there was a feminine side to me. I dressed only in gray for years and years. Um, and so I started to let a little more color into my life and more um, personality, I guess.
Mm.
And what fine I guess so what happened was, and I didn't realize it was happening, is that I helped myself understand how it didn't really matter to me anymore what people thought of me. I
Mm.
realized that I wasn't transitioning to satisfy someone else's idea of what a woman was like, or
Yeah.
stopping from transitioning because I wanted to be what other people thought a man should be like. When they just couldn't tell the difference, they didn't know what pronoun to use. I finally learned to it not really matter what pronoun people used with me.
Mm-hmm.
And at
Mm-hmm.
that point, I realized that I wasn't really a feminine man. I was actually
Mm-hmm.
um, a woman. And
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
uh, um, the stress. Well, I had an opportunity to go to Hawaii for work, and took an extra week. And while I was there, I was able to dress the entire time. And again, nothing happened. Nobody noticed. But when I got back, I had to dress as a man at work, and I found every reason to not go to work. And that's bad because I owned my own business at that time. And to avoid going to the retail location because I'd have to dress as a man got to be a real strain. It was a strain on my family. And Celestine said something that I don't think was intended to be nice, but it was ultimately the most freeing thing. She said, "Everybody knows you're weird, so you may as well just be who you are." Well,
You know, speak.
uh, it was perfect. I mean, it really was perfect. And so the
Yeah.
next day, I
Yeah.
actually changed at work.
Hmm. You know, I had the privilege of hearing Celestine, your wife, speak too at that session at the symposium, and the journey from her perspective and from her experiences, I have to say, just as engaging and just as powerful, because obviously as you transitioned, chose to transition, so did she, in her way, in accepting um, this wife, who was her husband, and for your daughter as well. Can you say a little bit about um, how that transition was for them, and just in the context of your own faith and spirituality, how your transition as a family has affected your faith, or was informed by
Yeah,
your
oh
faith and
yeah.
spirituality.
Well, absolutely. That's a big question there, but let me try and dig into it
Yeah,
here.
yeah.
Um, the Celeste, actually, I was not Catholic when I transitioned, and
Hmm.
had
Hmm.
not been raised in any with any religious training. So I was still kind of I didn't know I was Catholic yet. That was a transition that was coming
Hmm.
up. But for Celestine, she was born Catholic, as it were, and so we had a Catholic marriage. We were married in the church, and our daughter was raised Catholic. She had always been a thinking Catholic, that not simply dogmatic, but her father had been Jesuit trained. She would always challenge him. He would challenge her. She really examined her faith regularly. And so I think it was a lot of the sense of Catholic justice that and social justice that kind of spurred her on to work to be with me, if you will, in terms of going to pride parades and that sort of thing. What what we find, well, we were disturbed, and why we use the term, accidental lesbians, is that she was at first very concerned about the impression people would have, is that she was a lesbian, and that she wasn't a lesbian. That's not how she identified, and it was the idea that there isn't really a word for her sexuality. That the reality is she's the partner of a transgender person, and that anyone can assume anything about your sexuality depending on who you happen to be with at that moment. But she had to get to the point where that didn't matter to her, that she understood who she really was, and so she wasn't, deeply affected by what other people's comments might be, or how she thought people might be perceiving her. And I think ultimately, in theory, Catholics marry for life. And so I think that was kind of a strong idea for her. We realized that there are very few couples that, have been married. At that time, it was 15 years, that your partner still has the same body they had when you met them. Who at 50 has the body they had at 20? So the idea of leaving just because someone had changed their body or how people thought of them was managed to drive that out. It wasn't easy, certainly. It took that year of thinking about it and putting it together. But also, I think I brought my family along with me on the road of discovery. So it had been preceded by about 5 years of me starting to understand that there was something different about me in terms of gender, and letting them in on that. And as I researched, we looked at the information and so on, and so that was really, I think, a big part of how we managed to stay together. We also were in California, and it was it's an easier place, a very politically correct place that other parts of the country are really just starting to catch up with now.
But it might be easy, but relatively speaking, I just think it's an amazing story, all of you together, and it's a story of a lot of soul searching and a lot of choosing fidelity in your relationship, and choosing integrity, and it strikes me that the work that you chose to do to be true to yourself, and the work that any of us do to be true to ourselves, whether it's coming into our sexual identity and the dignity and the holiness and the beauty of that, or in gender transitioning, it really calls from us some a lot of work, but a lot of richness, and the opportunity to stand in a grounded place is immense for those of us who have who are of sexual minorities or gender identities. And so I just really honor the story that you bring, and the integrity that all of you bring to the table. Now, your daughter is writing a book, right? Alethea is writing a book about you, about her
She
relationship with
is.
you.
She is. She's writing a book about, sort of her point of view on the gender transition, and so we'll get
Hmm.
a better view of what that's about upcoming. She
Hmm.
hasn't shared too much of it with me
Did she
yet,
sit? Has she
but
sat
we
down with you to do some sort of formal interviewing, or?
she has, yes. We all sat
Yeah.
together and did an interview quite recently, actually, over Easter,
Hmm.
and it was
Hmm.
that was an interesting path too. That was sort of taking us along that passion path through the gender
Hmm.
change. There's some real parallels there to
Hmm.
um, Christ's path, and so we kind of delved into that.
Not just parallels, but
I have.
you're actually, you're walking in the footsteps of Christ. I mean, you're living our Christian story. So, you were married in the Catholic
Well, it's
Church, and now
interesting.
yeah, go
Yeah,
ahead.
I well, you're right because when I was going through transition, I didn't have any training really, and so I didn't understand um, you know, Christ's path. I did have a time um, shortly after I transitioned, about 6 months, I guess, after I transitioned, where I saw God, and so I couldn't deny the existence of God anymore. Um, but I still didn't understand Jesus. That didn't make too much sense to me. And it wasn't
Mm,
until I got to Greenbelt in the Catholic community. It's an intentional Eucharistic community where it's like a parish, except it's led by lay leaders, and we
mm-hmm,
do have visiting priests who come from uh, parts of the church that are not your general parish priest. They
mm-hmm,
come from Georgetown and other universities, and they come by and visit. So they've got a really educated view uh, on the readings, and then we have what's called a shared homily, and
mm-hmm,
in that shared homily, everyone is invited to speak up and see and explain how that day's readings relate to them personally in their daily lives. And it was through that process that I came to understand what Jesus was really all about and
mm,
what being a Catholic was about.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
I hadn't until that time really understood. It didn't. There were too many lofty words. There were religious tones that didn't make sense to me. I had to have some kind of translation. And once I
mm-hmm,
did, we say every Sunday um, that Jesus suffered, died, and was buried, and rose again. And I realized that yes, I'm walking that path because I suffered pretending to be someone I wasn't, putting my false self out there. I I died from shame, from the idea that anyone would find out, and I was buried in guilt.
mm,
And it was really freeing myself
mm,
freeing myself from that guilt, and accepting who I really was and
mm-hmm,
showing people who I really was,
mm-hmm.
that brought me back to life and
Yeah.
returned me to a heavenly existence, shall we say. So,
Lazarus come
yeah.
out, and you certainly did. Yeah, beautiful. And I want to start a new paragraph here. And
Okay.
first of all, folks, those of you who are participating, you'll have a chance have some questions asked in about 10 minutes or so. So if you haven't already, in the question and answer box, type in your question for Hilary. In the last 20 minutes of this hour, we'll entertain as many questions as we can. Hilary, back to the symposium. So you had this breakout session, and you were in, one of the smaller rooms, and there weren't a whole lot of people attending that. And I'm a bit scandalized by the lack of interest, because your story is profound, and it's also a mirror for all of us when it comes to transformation, when it comes to being true to ourselves, when it comes to being who we are and being that well, in the words of Francis de Sales, integrity, really a tremendous mirror. And we like to believe that we're a very inclusive community. We like to say gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender, and we're adding intersex, and we're adding questioning, and I'm really not at all convinced that we are of one community. And I think for the L's and the G's, oftentimes the B's and the T's and the I's are sort of token additions, and they should not be. And I'm wondering how you experience that. If your experience is different than that, if you feel as though there's understanding and unity and.
I have been quite blessed to, being part of a local pride group here, where it's not just gays or just lesbians or just transgender. We kind of all get together and we all have a good time, and so it really is. I think, in all fairness, to the symposium. There were a lot of sessions at any one time, so people had I'm sure, a very hard time choosing what they thought would be most important to them. And everybody comes with a certain set of issues they need to deal with, and a lot of people don't necessarily identify their issues as gender issues, or that because, and I understand that transgender people make up, less than 1% of 1% in the population in general. So even getting 10 people in the room, I thought was a pretty good number. Some of the other sessions were pretty small too. What was important to me is that there were some people who were touched who needed to be touched, and they needed the information that I was able to give in that room. And also, that is all on tape as well. We had a great person recording it, so there's a great recording of that can be ordered from New Ways Ministries. So I think it'll have that opportunity to impact more lives and to impact the people that it's really critical for. But I think you do bring up a good point, and it's important for gays and lesbians to understand that they have gender issues too. That it's very often the effeminate gay men that are the ones who get beat up. It is the butch lesbians who have more trouble. Very often they have more trouble in a women's bathroom than a lot of transsexuals do. Many transsexuals are very passable and never get a second thought, but very masculine lesbians are more out. They're more at risk. And so the same kinds of gender issues that people who need a specific way for people to relate are a real problem for the entire community. And I think that's why we tend to work together so well on political issues.
Sure. At this point, I'd like to open it up. So, Logan, I don't know if you're ready to present some of the questions that have been asked. I haven't had a chance to look myself. Though I'm seeing at the bottom there, Victor from Boston, who is a member of the Young Adult Caucus at Dignity, has the question, is there anything Dignity USA or local chapters or the caucuses can do to be more inclusive to the transgender community, something that we can do better? Hilary?
Well, I haven't been that deeply involved in Dignity USA, and particularly at the chapter level.
Uh-huh.
I think that there are tools that are out there that can be put to use. Some of the sort of basic things that we talk about often are really reaching out to the transgender community. It's easy for them to think that they're not going to be involved, and that if there isn't something that is done especially for transgender people to attract them in the first place. One of our group tonight is relatively big for a transgender get together. And I think that it's very often the problem is that this is people who are struggling with gender identity disorder, or have these feelings that they don't quite know what to do with, are very often it's very hard for them to get together into some sort of community and to understand. Particularly to understand a Catholic community that's going to be a positive environment for them.
Right.
It's easy to misunderstand that, and then of course there's a history with the gay and lesbian community too that causes very often rifts, if you will. There are even challenges within the transgender community. With cross-dressers not being comfortable around transsexuals and vice versa, and young people not being comfortable around older people, and so it's there's a lot to struggle through for any kind of
I guess
any kind of group organization.
at the base of it all, we're pretty human, right? And we bring our baggage to the table, no matter who we are. So, Jane is a grandmother of a transgender teenager, and she says is a beautiful young woman. And Jane wants to learn more about successful transitions and ways to encourage her granddaughter on her journey. What would you say, briefly? What would you say to her granddaughter?
Well, in some ways, you know need to support her like you would any other grandchild. And be accepting and caring for her. Take her out shopping like you would any of your other granddaughters. And I think that it's the kind of thing where the more you normalize it, the kind of simpler it becomes. In a lot of ways, you don't have to step outside of, what nature would guide you to do. And although, there are some who need more support in terms of, showing up for them along with them at some pride meeting or something like that, so that they really understand that you really are behind them. And of course, working with your other family members is critically important too. So if somebody like her father is having trouble, or somebody else in the family, an aunt or an uncle, being able to share those stories and look towards a better future, really, I think, is the kind of work that you need to do. Sometimes, working with the school is important, so that they understand that, what this young person's going through. They're not going through alone. They're going through support of their whole family, their extended family. That kind of show of support can mean a lot to an entire community.
Thank you. Logan, any other questions, Logan or Bill, to present to us? I see one from, there we go, thank you, from Delphine in Miami. How has Catholicism been an ally, and how has Catholicism been a challenge for you? Thanks, Delphine.
Well, you're adding the "for you" to this, I see, because Catholicism has been a challenge for a lot of other people. I have to say that I'm probably in the minority. Although Catholicism has no actual public policy about transgender people, that it is true that they won't accept transgender people into any religious position, neither priest nor, and I should say Roman Catholicism, nor as a sister. And in Roman Catholicism, there are, of course, other Catholic organizations, including Dignity, in which you can be very active and still very much Catholic. For me, because I approached Catholicism after I transitioned, the question of how I would be baptized was not a question. I didn't have to have a baptismal record changed, which the church will not do. They don't recognize sex change as something that actually exists, and so for me, I was baptized and as a woman, and it was again very validating. For me, I approached Catholicism in very much a thinking way. So the kinds of information I got about Catholicism was all incredibly supportive. Every priest I've talked to has been supportive, and again, I'm very lucky in that. The bishops I've talked to have been supportive, and again, I've been very lucky in that. So I think that it would be a mistake to think that there isn't a lot of support out there. Within Catholicism, there's recent polling that finds that a vast majority of Catholics actually support equal rights for transgender people, and that's good news because clearly they're looking towards the social justice aspects of Catholicism and not towards the dogmatic papal decrees about Catholicism, or not even decrees, they're kind of just jibes from the Pope at this point. So for
folks,
me, very liberating, very powerful. Okay.
Yeah. Here we go. We talked about that already. Thanks, Victor. If you want to offer a question, you see the question and answer box to the right of the text chat box. So just click on question and answer and type in your question. So Jim from Indianapolis, how did you discern you were totally woman versus just a more feminine guy?
Well, let's see. That's kind of that's a tough thing to slice, I guess, for a lot of people. I guess one of the things I actually talking to my therapist at the time, I said, I think I'm a woman more than just a feminine man, and she said, Hilary, you're extremely feminine for a woman. You're going to have to deal with that. And so I realized that was in fact, important part of it. Um, One of the other kind of dead giveaways, I guess, from my therapist said that when the hormones start kicking in, once you get onto a hormone therapy, and you have feminine hormones in your body starts to change, and the way it smells, the way your emotions are, the way your body starts to fit, um, and either it feels right or it doesn't. And for me, it felt really, really right. And that was, for me, a big clue that this is what I needed in my life. And it's not that way for everybody. Some people go on to hormones and right back off of them. For some people, it's not the right time in their life. For others, it can be salvation. I do know that the vast majority of people who do transition have attempted suicide, or at least considered suicide at some point in their lives. Very often, transitioning, it's a huge step, and it is very often the alternative to suicide for a lot of people. And that certainly was the case in my life too. I did in fact consider suicide at one point as being a logical option to spare everyone the pain and so on of what transition would mean.
Thanks for that, Hilary. Delphine has another question. How do we create spaces for expansive engagement of transgender to include people who do not transition in the traditional sense, people who can't afford medical surgical procedures, for instance?
Well, that's critically important, and I think the vast majority of people who, even those who transition, do not have medical procedures because of the expense. It's not covered by but a handful of insurance. And I used to be able to say it was covered by no insurance, but now there's a handful, and so that's changing. It's important. The way to create those spaces, I think, is something that I've been sort of deeply involved in, and that is creating the legal ramifications to be sure that we're allowing people to not be discriminated against in terms of housing and employment in particular, so that when they're in those in-between places, or if their transition for them doesn't take them to an extremely passable location, that they're still able, that the laws are on the books to protect them from harassment, and that the opportunity for training for employers and for landlords is in place, so that we can start to create a society that accepts that there are people of all genders. It help us to step outside of this, strict gender, two-gender paradigm. So I think there's the legal aspect, and there's the personal aspects.
Yeah. It makes such a difference when we start rubbing elbows with people of diversity, of gender variations and sexual orientation variations. The more we give ourselves to getting out there and to getting to know folks and them us, God, the more gorgeous God becomes. I mean, this creative, divine love that brings to birth such a beautiful diversity in humanity in terms of gender variation and orientation, and my getting to know you a bit, Hilary, has really influenced my own sort of appreciation of that creative divine love, and I really thank you for that. I'm going to ask Bill to come.
Yeah. Okay.
Go ahead,
You
please.
bring up a really important point, is that, and part of what I think Delphine was getting at is that as transgender people, we have to come out and be willing to rub elbows and let people understand that we are transgender, and that's hard. Not it's very different than coming out as gay or lesbian. Very often, many of us have worked hard to make this transition to the gender that we want to live in. I mean, the kind of the good stuff about doing the transition is that you get to be the woman you always wanted to be, or the man you always wanted to be. And so giving that up a little bit by admitting your past is tough. It's tough. You were right when you said I'll bet it was hard to show those pictures. It is hard. It's the first time I've ever done it.
Yeah. One more question. Oops.
It was there a second ago.
Just lost it. Yeah, Delphine had another question, and thank you. How has your and your family's relationship with God transitioned as you and your family has transitioned?
Boy, Delphine, that's a good question. I don't know that for my family that their relationship to God has changed that much. They I think always believed in a God that supported a vast variety of differences in the world. For me, of course, I discovered God. I was much too fake to actually understand, and I didn't have access to emotions, so I wasn't able to really have an emotional connection to God. It was all theoretical for me before that, and therefore not very real. Yeah. I see we're running out of time.
We are. It is always a pleasure to chat with you, Hilary. Thank you. And I want to bring Bill back on for a little bit more, some review of what can happen after this point. But I do want to say, y'all can go to the Dignity USA Voices blog site to continue the conversation as well after we wrap up here. Bill?
Thank you so much, Hilary and Jim, for an informative and engaging conversation, and especially to Hilary for so honestly sharing with us. Thank you as well to everyone who enlivened the conversation with your questions and comments, and even if we didn't get to them, the chat was very interesting here in the background. A few points before we close. First, the conversation this evening has been recorded. We'll send the link via Facebook, Twitter, and Dignity USA News. Please feel free to pass it on to others who are not able to be present this evening. As Jim just mentioned, voices will be available to you to continue the dialogue. As you leave the webinar, you'll see a survey this evening. We'd really appreciate your taking time to provide honest feedback to us. And if you would like to comment beyond the survey, you can do so by emailing questions, comments, or ideas to qcf@dignityusa.org, and those will get to Jim. I would be remiss in my role as a member of the Board of Directors if I didn't mention that Dignity USA relies on memberships and donations to fund most of our work on behalf of GLBT Catholics and our allies. If you are willing and able to contribute $5, $10 or more to help support this initiative and Dignity USA's other ministries, we would be very grateful. You can make your gift online, and the URL was just shown, www.dignityusa.org/join. Finally, thank you for all of your participation. We hope you will join us in the upcoming sessions of Queer Catholic Faith, and that you will invite a friend or two. Thank you all, and good night.